It is that time of year. YouTube is once again asking for F1 predictions. Hello everyone, welcome back to AXGP. My name is Aaron and today we're going to be going through my F1 predictions for 2023. I've come up with a few topics to make predictions for. I've also asked for predictions from you guys, my audience, so I've got a few of your questions in as well. So I'm going to put my neck out on the line and let's see at the end of the year how many of these are correct, or just how wildly wrong I was. So let's kick things off with the Constructors World Champions. And I'm going for Mercedes. Now, I don't think Mercedes are going to start the season as the fastest car. And I think from testing, which concluded on Saturday, they're definitely not the fastest car out there. But I think in a combination of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, they have the quickest driver pairing in terms of qualifying and race pace. And they're going to get a lot of points from that. Ferrari, you're never quite sure what's going to happen there. Fred Vasseur is going to get his feet under the table and put people in place to make certain changes happen. And I think the Red Bull dynamic is so Verstappen dominant that you might see Perez start well like he did in 2022, but then fade as the year goes on. So that is my reasoning for Mercedes as Constructors World Champions. Surprise team. So my surprise team in 2023 is actually going to be Williams. And I know that's kind of an easy prediction to make considering they were bottom of the table last year and at some races a little bit adrift of the field. But I think they've made a really good step with their car in testing. And I can see them being there or thereabouts in the midfield battle. I think the midfield is going to be really tight this year. And I think you could see quite wild fluctuations from race to race with some cars at some races being 4th or 5th fastest and then the next race being 7th or 8th and going out in Q1 perhaps. So it's going to be quite tight, and I think Williams are going to be in that battle with Albon and Sargent. I think Albon's going to be leading the charge for them, and I think they're going to surprise a few people in 2023. Surprise driver. I think the driver that's going to surprise everyone the most is Nick de Vries at AlphaTauri. Now, he's coming from Formula E. He's the first driver to make the jump from Formula E to Formula One on a permanent basis. We've seen plenty of drivers go the other way, so like John-Eric Vergne, Sebastian Buemi, Pascal Wehrlein, who are all doing very well over in FE, but we haven't seen it go the other way yet, and this is our first example of it. Of course, De Vries did really well on his debut with Williams in 2022, where he stood in for Alex Albon, picking up that 9th place finish. It's going to be a little bit more difficult in 2023 because I'm not sure the AlphaTauri is going to be quite as good, and they didn't have a good season last year. And alongside Yuki Tsunoda, it's a slightly difficult benchmark because on his day we know Tsunoda can be very good, but those very good days are pretty few and far between. He's got to knit that all together, and if he does, De Vries has got a really good benchmark. But I still think De Vries is going to outperform expectations and do a lot better than people expect him to. Most disappointing team. So the team that I think is going to disappoint the most, and they've kind of already started disappointing everybody in the nicest possible way, I suppose, and that is McLaren, because they've got two brilliant drivers with huge potential, and Lando Norris is already looking a bit frustrated after testing, and of course they've got Oscar Piastri after that contract saga with Alpine last year. So they've got two drivers with massive potential, but they kind of haven't delivered the car for them, and they've admitted to missing targets for the season, which is disappointing in terms of their development and their readiness. But we saw last year they had a bit of a rotten test in Bahrain, and the opening round was very, very difficult for them, but they recovered and they still finished P5 in the championship, the only team to finish on the podium from the midfield. So not all hope is lost yet for McLaren, but I am worried for them, and if you want to see a video more about my worries for them, click on the card just up here somewhere. Most disappointing driver. Now, this was a tough one because I think a lot of people are disappointed with Yuki Tsunoda because of his F2 season and almost the hype that came with him, and we were kind of expecting bigger things from him. So I don't think we're going to be necessarily disappointed by him this year, but I'm going for Kevin Magnussen. And I know K-Mag's popular. I like K-Mag. I think he's really, really talented. And he's shown with his pole position in Sao Paulo that he can do it. But I think alongside Nico Hülkenberg this year, his propensity to get into tangles, which we saw on the opening lap several times in 2022, it's really going to trip him up, because if he keeps losing those good opportunities and potential points paying positions, it's really going to make him look bad against Hülkenberg. And this isn't to say that Magnussen should be dropped at the end of the season or anything. I just think he's going to disappoint in his performance against Hülkenberg and within the Haas team. So it might he might prove me completely wrong. I really hope he does. Do you know what? I don't really want any driver to disappoint, because we all want them to do well. But I think Kevin is going to just be... I think he's going to be quicker than Hülkenberg over one lap. But I think in race trim, the Hulk is going to be able to get the job done. We know that Nico can put a race together and string points results together. Unless there's a podium on the line in which he's magnetically attracted to barriers. So maybe that's K-Mag's out, but I do see him disappointing in his fight against Hülkenberg. Most pole positions. So this could be quite a tricky one, because you've got several drivers who have got exquisite one-lap pace. Of course, there's Lewis Hamilton, who's got more than a century of pole positions. You've got Max Verstappen, who is unbelievably quick. Charles Leclerc took the most poles in 2022 with Ferrari, and they again look like they're going to be strong over a single lap. Carlos Sainz has shown that he can do it in qualifying, and George Russell, of course, has a pole position. And don't discount Sergio Perez. And of course, you can potentially throw Fernando Alonso into the mix, because Aston Martin are looking pretty good. Lance Stroll has a pole position, so if the Aston is good and the moment is right, Lance could put himself on the pole position once again. And don't discount the Alpine duo either. They're pretty good. Lando Norris has a pole position. There's so many drivers who could take a pole position, but I think Charles Leclerc is going to take the pole position, the most pole positions in 2023. He's got that combination of flair, that poise with the car. He just feels where the grip is and where the speed needs to come from. It doesn't necessarily help him over race distance, because sometimes it can be a little bit too much on the edge. But he, in combination with the Ferrari, the power unit in the Ferrari, I think that's going to be a very potent combination on Saturday afternoons or Friday evening if it's a sprint weekend. So Charles Leclerc is my pick for most pole positions. Number of drivers on the podium. This is always an interesting prediction to make, because you're kind of banking on the midfield taking advantage of the opportunities and the top three giving those opportunities. And we've seen in years gone by where there's been lots of crazy races. You take 2021, for example, plenty of opportunity for midfield teams to get on the podium. And Alpine even winning a race where Aston Martin finished second in the race, but they didn't keep that one. But we had AlphaTauri on the podium that year, Aston Martin. Who else made the podium in 2021? McLaren. Ferrari were technically a midfield team that year because their car wasn't quite up to speed with the front two. So yeah, there's definite opportunity. Williams were on podium that year, whether you count it or not, in Belgium with George Russell. So it's always quite a fun one to predict. And I'm going to go with 12 drivers in total on the podium. So of course you're going to have the top 6 drivers at the front 3 teams. So the 2 Red Bull drivers, the 2 Ferrari drivers and the 2 Mercedes drivers. I can see Alonso getting a podium, and if the Aston Martin is good, I can see Lance Stroll getting a podium, because he did that in 2020 when the Racing Point was pretty good. And I know it was a Mercedes copy, but he still had to put it on the podium, and he did that. I can see the Alpine drivers getting a podium. I'm hoping that the McLaren drivers get a podium as well. I think Bottas, if the Alfa Romeo is good and the opportunity arises, he's still got it in him to get a podium. And I'd really like to see a Haas on the podium as well, because they've been through the mud and they come out the other side last year with a really good car. Now they've got 2 drivers who can certainly put it on the podium with their talent. And, you know, which one will it be? Magnussen's got the pole. Maybe Hulk gets the podium this year. But I'm going to go for 12 drivers this year on the podium. Okay, so let's get into some of your questions for me to predict. And the first one comes from F1 Chronicle, the Grid Talk podcast. Go and subscribe to them. Make sure you listen to their show. We have race reviews, race previews, qualifying reviews. I'll be a panelist on some of the shows as the year goes on. We have fireside episodes, interviews with different people. We have Formula 2 and Formula 3 podcast now as well. So plenty of content for you to get yourselves stuck into there. And their question is, will we see Daniel Ricciardo line up on the starting grid for a race this year? Tricky one to answer. I think we'd all like to see it. I don't think we will, though, because I think Perez has done enough to sort of keep faith, unless there's an injury to a driver in the Red Bull sort of camp. So one of the main Red Bull drivers, of course, but AlphaTauri as well. If Tsunoda's really underperforming, or De Vries is having a really difficult time, maybe Ricciardo will end up in an AlphaTauri. But they have said, I think it was Franz Tost said it during testing, that they'd rather put one of the other young drivers in there. You've got Ayumu Iwasa in Formula 2, who's potentially a championship contender. Liam Lawson did some FP1s last year, and he's going to Super Formula this year. So I think that the path back into F1 with Red Bull is a little bit clogged up for Daniel Ricciardo. So unfortunately, I don't think we'll see the Honey Badger on the grid this year. George Howson asks for McLaren's Constructor Championship position. I've got a video coming out on Friday about my Constructors Championship predictions, but I don't think McLaren will finish as well as they did last year. Let's put it that way. So I don't spoil the surprise for that video later in the week. So in short, McLaren will finish below 5th place. Hit the Apex podcast host Jawad Yaqub asks, who will take over Gotifi's mantle? Now I'm guessing by that Jawad means the driver who has a bit of a cult status amongst the social media fans, maybe the driver who crashes a lot, perhaps. So, I mean, the obvious answer is perhaps Lance Stroll or maybe Logan Sergeant, but I think it's going to be Yuki Tsunoda. We know he is very quick, but we also know he can be very prone to crashing, and the Yuki hype train has a lot of people on it, so maybe there'll be a lot of support for Tsunoda to stay in Formula One, especially if he's underperforming. Carl King from the Monkey Seat podcast has asked 3 questions. Who will do better than expected? Who will do worse than expected? I think I've covered both of those so far. And he asks, is Hamilton going to own George Russell? Now, Carl is a massive George Russell fan. If you've heard him speak about George Russell, you'll know exactly how much he likes George Russell. But I think Lewis is going to beat George Russell. I don't think he's going to completely own him, because George, I think, is a very talented driver. But I think we're going to see Lewis take his game to another level, something that Russell couldn't really live with last year when Hamilton did start to raise his game, when he'd stopped sort of faffing around with the car setup and trying to find solutions to the problems that the car had. So I think we're going to see Russell a little bit behind Hamilton this year. Philip Matthew of the Grip Strip podcast asks, will Logan Sergeant get more than one season at Williams? I think he will. I like Logan Sergeant. I think he's quick. Williams have put him in there. Well, I say Williams. They've got, of course, a new team principal in James Vowles. And I think James Vowles is sensible enough to realise that Sergeant will need time in the car, and the car needs to be developed. And once perhaps the Williams get into a midfield battle and Sergeant can get involved in that, that's when we'll see just how good he is at Formula One level. And for Williams, if let's say they lose Alex Albon to perhaps AlphaTauri or maybe even Red Bull or somebody else on the grid, it would make sense for Sargent to stay with the team, so there's not too much upheaval there. So yes, Logan Sargent will be on the grid in 2024. Tom Horrocks from the Monkey Seat podcast and fellow Grid Talk host says, will Stroll's body be pink from all the spanking he will get this year? I'm guessing that spanking will come from Fernando Alonso. And judging by the fact that it's a doubt whether Lance will be in the first race, he's yet to drive the AMR 23 at a proper test or event. I think he did the shakedown for them at Silverstone. So he's had very limited experience with this new car. He could get soundly trounced by Alonso, and that's happened to a lot of drivers. Take Stoffel Van Dorn, for example. He got absolutely pummeled by Alonso in 2017 and 2018. So potentially it could be that Stroll gets his bottom smacked by Alonso and metaphorically by his dad as well. Grid Talk host Ruby Price asks for an outsider prediction for the 2023 title that isn't Verstappen, Leclerc or Hamilton. Now, interestingly, I did ask this same question to Ruby on a Q&A for her YouTube channel, so go and check that out. I'll leave a link to it either up here somewhere or in the show notes below. So my prediction, my outside prediction, I don't think Perez will get close to the title. I think the Red Bull team is too Verstappen-centric. I think it would take a lot for Sainz to overcome Leclerc because Leclerc has just got that raw one-lap pace. But we did see Sainz get closer to Leclerc in the second half of 2022. The closest pairing in teammates is, of course, Hamilton and Russell, on paper at least. So my outside bet for the title is George Russell. If Hamilton has a bit of a sticky patch, or Hamilton and Russell is able to put those races together as we saw him do last season, then maybe George can have a tilt at the title. But having a look at the pecking order so far, I don't think it's going to be that easy for the second driver in the top three teams to mount a championship challenge, especially if Red Bull have got that advantage early on. The cost cap penalty will perhaps come in to pinch them towards the end of the season. Leclerc will want to make more of a fight of the championship this year, and Hamilton wants to get back in the fight as well. So it might be that those teams are having to back a driver much earlier than perhaps they would like. Whoa HIV asked in the Formula E watch-along for the Cape Town E-Prix that I did at the weekend. He asked, can you predict who's going to be the class of the midfield in your F1 predictions? Now, I'm not going to spoil the video, but my top two midfield teams are Aston Martin and Alpine. I won't reveal which order I have them in. I'll leave that for the video on Friday, which is a short, by the way, so make sure you check that section of the channel out as well. But yeah, that's who it's going to be between, because we haven't seen the best of Alpine in testing, and Aston Martin have shown pretty well, kind of backing up the rumours that they'd found a load of pace. So I'll just keep my powder dry on that one until Friday, but that's who it's going to be between. Host of the F2 show, Fraser Ford, made his own prediction. He said Aston Martin P4 and best of the rest. Now, again, I'm going to defer my answer to the video on Friday, but as I've already mentioned, they are in with a shout. Aston Martin look very good. I would say they are currently the best midfield team, but I don't think, as I said, we've seen the best of Alpine. And it is only testing that we're going on at the moment, so it could be completely that Mercedes have been sandbagging and all of a sudden they're a second and a half up the road or something, because we've seen that before. Maybe Alpine really are struggling. Maybe McLaren were just making it all up after all, just to throw everyone off the scent. But I don't think it's quite that dramatic. Aston Martin certainly looks strong, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them at least start the season as the fourth fastest car. Drivers' World Champion. So we come to the big one, and I'm going to go for Max Verstappen. He looks every bit the favourite that he is at the moment. He's coming in as a double World Champion, and the Red Bull looks really good. It's obedient, it's fast on pretty much any tyre. It looks good over a race run. Whether it's got the one-lap pace that Ferrari potentially has is a question. But we saw last year that the Red Bull was just able to pass things in a straight line with its low drag configuration. I say configuration, but the philosophy of the design allows it to be very low drag. It's got good top speed with the... and it is now a Honda power unit again. I wish they'd make up their mind. So yeah, Verstappen looking every inch the title favourite that he should be coming in as a double world champion. So they are my predictions. Of course, you can let me know your predictions in the comment section down below. And if you're listening to this on audio, which will be released as an audio, you can always comment on the YouTube video, send me a tweet. The links will be in the show notes below. Or you can send me a message on TikTok or on Instagram if you want to follow on there. I have now created a TikTok account for this channel. Not a massive fan of TikTok, but it's another place for people to discover the content. So that's, just using the tools at your disposal, as they would say in Formula One. Of course, let me know your predictions in the comments. So thanks very much for joining me today. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, leave a like, and subscribe for more Grand Prix content. And thanks very much for joining me.